Hello all, Old Geek here, and it is review time. My non-D&D reviews don't get all that many views, but so what? Variety is a good thing, right? The topic of this review is the Call of Cthulhu book, Reign of Terror. This 128-page hardback is, as the title suggests, set during the French Revolution. Liberté, égalité, fraternité, and all of that. It contains background information regarding the history of the time and the social issues plaguing Paris, as well as two fairly meaty scenarios. The first set in the lead up to the revolution in 1789, and the second is set at the end of the revolution in 1794. Now, I've not yet run the 1794 scenario. I will give that a thorough review in a later video, but this video will focus on the setting material and the 1789 episode. First though, presentation. And this book is sumptuous. From the striking cover to lashings of art, both full colour and murky monochrome, it stylishly befits the tone of the era. Maps are excellent, they are bold, they are colourful and clear. Some of the artwork is not original. There are pieces by artists from the historic period that the book examines, but these only serve to enhance the overall look and feel of the book. The introduction, for example, has this piece opposite to it, The Storming of the Bastille by Jean-Pierre Huet. I approve. Reign of Terror's first adventure is intended to be a prequel to the Horror on the Orient Express campaign, which is one of Chaosium's most lavish products. One which certainly does not shirk in terms of any detail. In fact, some might argue that it goes overboard at times. It's a hell of an undertaking for a keeper to run that campaign. Such is the amount of background detail that is provided. As Reign of Terror is smaller, much smaller, there's less here in the way of background detail. But that's not a problem. In fact, I think that Chaosium get that balance just about right. There's just the right amount of detail for a keeper to set the scene and get the feel of Paris in the desperate days leading up to the 14th of July, 1789. La 14 Juillet. Add into the mix the colour handouts and free PDF for the keeper to download and print out and use so as to save the original book, and you get a product that is truly top-notch in terms of its presentation. Okay, on to the meat of the book now, its contents, and time for a spoiler warning. Now, I'm going to try to avoid too many direct details, but this review is mostly aimed at prospective keepers rather than players, so you have been warned. I'm not going to give away massive aspects of the scenario, but you'll get a few hints from this review. We get a few pages of general background on life in Paris in 1789, the class divide, the crippling poverty, the scarcity of food, and the indifference of the aristocracy. As I've already said, this section is quite brief, but it contains just the right amount of detail for the keeper to work with. It is followed by a list of the various NPCs who play significant roles in the scenarios, and then it's straight into the first adventure, which begins with a prologue giving the players a glimpse into the future. I am now going to read the introductory prologue section to give you an idea of how it's written. I think this is really good. It is June 1794. A two-wheeled cart with high wooden sides rumbles through the streets of Paris, drawn by a tired horse. Men and women stand in the back of the cart, some downcast, some weeping. One man holds his head high. His back is to us. We cannot see his face. The cart passes along a street lined with crowds. They jeer at the occupants of the cart, laughing and making gestures by drawing their fingers sharply across their necks. But not everyone mocks the cart. A middle-aged woman with two young girls aged 7 or 8 pushes forward and looks anxiously at the cart, hugging the girls tight to her sides. A broken old man shakes his head as the cart goes by, while a dog with one black ear runs after the cart, barking. A soldier curses and aims a kick. The dog howls and runs off. A young woman with close cropped blonde hair stands by the road, silent, face heavy with grief. A bearded man, his face lined with worry, leans on his crutch and yells a name in anguish. He cannot be heard over the jeers of the crowd. And a young man, his face old beyond his years, looks at the cart with an air of resignation and turns away. The cart continues. Soldiers clear the way and keep the crowd at bay. Finally, the cart rolls into a large square. In its centre stands the guillotine. The crowds throng around it. The cart reaches the base of the guillotine. The man steps out first, his head held high. We see his broad back as he ascends the steps of the guillotine. The executioner steps forward to push him down, but the man kneels of his own volition. We hear the clack, clack, clack of the women seated below, knitting, their eyes fixed on the platform. The blade is poised, a shining length of bright, sharp steel. The light glints off a small pattern on the blade, a concentric circle. The crowd holds its collective breath. Time stands still for an instant, and then the blade falls. The adventures are designed to be played with pre-generated characters. These are all soldiers in the French army, each with a differing attitude towards the revolution, different motivations and different personalities. They begin by overseeing the reburial of bodies. These are being moved from the overflowing Paris graveyards into the catacombs beneath the city. From there, a sequence of events draws the group into a conflict with a mysterious foreign aristocrat and his sordid lifestyle. Along with the Paris catacombs, the party will also spend time at the Palace of Versailles, which, due to King Louis XVI's financial issues, is not looking its best. It's here where the keeper gets to paint the stark contrast between the poverty on the streets of Paris and the ostentatious displays of the aristocracy with their underlying falseness. Reign of Terror takes great pains to showcase the elements of Parisian life that prompted the French Revolution, with frustrated romance, incessant gossip, fake displays of concern, all loosely papering over the crumbling bastion of the aristocracy. As I already mentioned, the player characters that are supplied are intended to have different political sympathies. Thus, the players are meant to lean into these when dealing with the variety of situations presented by the adventure. While the events of Reign of Terror are mostly fictional, it's pleasing to see the level of historical detail we are given and how actual events are tied into the plot of the scenarios. The Dauphin of France died on June the 4th, 1789, for example, and this occurs in the adventure, casting a shadow over the competence of one of the main NPCs. Some poetic license has been taken, as the movement of bones from the graveyards to the catacombs occurred several years earlier. But what's a couple of years among friends? As it really happened, and it does set up the scenarios rather nicely. Time to get more critical. The 1789 scenario is very much on the rails. It's a prequel to Horror on the Orient Express, and for it to mesh seamlessly with that larger campaign, there needs to be specific outcomes. And this for me is rather unsatisfying. The 1794 scenario is unshackled, as it operates separately from the Orient Express campaign, and though I've only skim-read that one so far, I'm quite optimistic as to how that one will run at the table. It feels like it's got a bit more freedom to it. The nature of the villain in 1789 leans heavily on several classic tropes, and it does not take a genius to work out his true nature. Thus the adventure, in order to provide a few shocks, goes slightly overboard. It can feel a little gratuitous at times. Good Cthulhu scenarios rely on an air of mystery, psychological uncertainty, and a fear of an unfathomable power. Yes, they can get quite grotesque, but there's always that unknowing aspect simmering underneath. The first scenario in Reign of Terror is almost devoid of those classic Cthulhu elements. It leans instead into its shock value, grotesque violence and over-the-top debauchery. It does feel more like slasher horror than Lovecraftian horror. Don't get me wrong though, there are scenes in here which can turn the stomach, and there's plenty with which to torment the player characters. It's just the overall tone that feels a little off. Add to this the fact that the player characters are all soldiers. Their skills and their abilities are largely physical, and thus the players may feel encouraged to resort to direct combat, something that Cthulhu adventures tend to push against. They are capable combatants, fairly well armed and robust. The adventure does try to hold them back by reinforcing that they should be following orders from their army captain to avoid risk and refrain from damaging evidence of the villain's behaviour. But you know what happens when players are unleashed on RPG scenarios. They like to burn things. The depth of detail and the wide variety of roleplay situations does go some way to alleviate the issues that this scenario has. And if the keeper can lean into that feel that the overall environment provides, the players probably won't be concerned about the rails that they are firmly being pushed along. As with the Jack the Ripper-esque Victorian gaslight era Cthulhu setting, the French Revolution provides a perfectly atmospheric backdrop. It's natural for this type of scenario. Disease, poverty, lack of regard for life, violence, double-crossing, rumour-mongering. It was an horrific era of European history, and thus perfect for horror role-playing. Despite all of my criticisms, that first scenario is fun to play. I can't deny that. Certainly, as keeper, I enjoyed running it, even if I felt a little constrained by it sometimes. I had a good time. My players gave me positive feedback, and after all, isn't that what matters? We play these games for fun, and we had a lot of fun playing it. Overall though, my feelings are somewhat mixed so far. Reign of Terror is a beautifully packaged product, providing just the right amount of detail. It's an ideal era for the game, but I'm not sure that presenting this in the form of a prequel to Horror on the Orient Express was the best approach, as certainly the 1789 adventure feels hamstrung by that fact. It causes it to suffer from the same flaws that the Dragonlance modules had for D&D, for example. I do, however, really like the look of the second scenario, so I'm going to hold off from casting my final judgment until after I've run that one. Yes, I'm taking the cowardly way out, avoiding the guillotine of public opinion at the moment. So, I've been the Old Geek. If you have enjoyed this video, then please drop a like, subscribe, a comment, and I shall see you next time. See ya.